Welcome everybody here on behalf of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee. This is the 45th year that we have been remembering Hiroshima on August 5th at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And the reason we remember the exact instant was a famous Einstein quote. He said, at that instant, talking about Hiroshima, at that instant, everything changed except for the way that we think. And thus, we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. So we took that to heart that we really need to, reflect on how in that instant everything changed, and we need to correspondingly start thinking in a different manner. So that's the backstory behind this. And so we've been doing this since 1981, 82 actually. So it would actually be, I guess, what it would be 39 years we've been doing this, but the exact moment. But the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee has been working with the A-bomb survivors in Japan and also with radiation survivors all over the world since 1981 when we were first founded. We especially work with the A-bomb survivors and Nihon Hidankyo, and that is the Japanese Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations. It's the large umbrella group. They are just starting they just observed their 70th anniversary. And the reason why they organized 10 years after the bombing was because there was a U.S. military occupation and there was an absolute censorship campaign that was going on, and they censored everything. So it made it impossible for there to be any real organizing of the survivors until after the occupation formally ended. And just to give you an example of how extreme this censorship was, so immediately following the atomic bombing, the doctors at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the doctors that came from throughout Japan became the world's greatest experts on radiation exposure and radiation sickness. And they developed some really good medical procedures to deal with that. And the U.S. government came in, shut down their practices, confiscated all of their records, and consigned untold, thousands and thousands and thousands of radiation sufferers, to death and to disfigurement and so on in the name of censorship. So I wanted to get that out there. So just very, very briefly, the way that the program is going to work is that at 7:15, we're going to have a moment's silence. So let me give a very brief introduction here to the program. And then what I'm going to do, it's only 7:04, I'm going to turn the program over to Reverend Daughtry for about 5 minutes, Reverend Daughtry, for you to speak in case you have to go. And then if you can hold on after we have our moment's silence, then I'll bring you back on again. So, but I want to tell this story to everyone. So Herbert and I first met when the phone rang at our house and in Arlington, and there was a voice on the other line, and he said, "This is Reverend Herbert Daughtry from New York, and I'd like to come to Washington, D.C. and talk about, some of the organizing for the June 12th protest in New York." And so we had a talk, and I arranged, and Reverend Daughtry came. We did a program at the Washington Peace Center, and I'm hoping that we have Elise Fisher on, who was the director of the Peace Center at that point. She's been invited, and I'm hoping that she'll be on. So we had a big meeting. Maybe 70 or 80 people is my memory. And Reverend Daughtry was there, and he talked about organizing for this rally. And so his commitment was that the nuclear abolition movement must be a multicultural, multiracial, diverse movement. And he talked with us about how uh, the movement really took off with the non-aligned movement, with Kenyatta and Nairi and many of the others in the non-aligned, Sukarno, many of the others in the non-aligned movement, and they were the ones that generated the energy for the non-proliferation treaty. So he was reminding us that people of color and people from the global South have always played a leadership and major role in all of this. So, and he talked about how in New York they were organizing the Progressive and Third World People's Caucus. So we took all of this to heart, and we took on the mantle of the Progressive and Third World People's Caucus. And through the Washington Peace Center, we organized 30 buses, and that was under the banner of the Progressive and Third World People's Caucus. And so Reverend Daughtry is a legend, and I'd like to ask him to say a few words, and at some point I will interrupt you, Reverend, so that we can have our commemoration of Hiroshima. So, Reverend Daughtry, you have the floor.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. As I said earlier, when you call, I will respond no matter what. You are the legend. I marvel at your years of commitment, dedication, and consistency. So I'm will always remember you're bringing the 30 buses to New York when you were organizing the Third World Progressive Movement as a part of D12. Well, you're still at it. I'm still at it to some extent, not as much as you are, but I'm still concerned more than ever about the peace movement. We added another dimension to it, which add even more fear, and that is AI. AI. I'm completely ignorant about AI, except that I've heard some scary things about it. The potential, as usual, there is two sides: the good that it can do, and the bad that it can do. And Pope Leo the 14th recently, I think back in May, issued an encyclical expressing his concern that we don't have guardrails, or that he's concerned about the human race, in fact. And I share that concern. Always concerned about war and peace. We're one family. We're one family in this great Earth planet, and we're a long ways from acting like it. And so we have to stay on the case, and in fact do all we can to improve it. I'm concerned. I reached 95. I'm among the senior citizens, and the years that I have left, I've expressed several concerns. Number one is war and peace. Number two is the AI dimension. Number three, we got to be concerned about global warming. And number four, about the present Trump administration. And those are my primary concerns as to where we're going with this, with our movement. And so, John, I commend you to the highest, and all of the people who are on the phone. Leslie, I was glad that she had a birthday a little while ago, and was glad to communicate. And I was looking forward to hearing her, seeing her. So, John, listen, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anytime you call, I'm available. Now, as I said, when I leave here and I'm going to my eternal exciting place. I'm not going to answer any phone calls.
Yeah. Thank you, Reverend Daughtry, very much. And you are excused. And thank you very much for your dedication over the years. And I'm sure your name will come up repeatedly during the evening. So you can leave us now if you need to go.
All right, I'll stay a little while longer.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now, we've got another 4 minutes before 7:15. So Hideko Tamura is here. She is an A-bomb survivor, and so Hideko, would you be willing to speak for 1 or 2 minutes about greeting the people and about the need for nuclear disarmament?
Thank you so very, very much for the privilege of being with you on the 5th of August, day before the horrific experience of my life took place in Hiroshima, as I innocently admired beautiful sunny day and my fortune of being able to come back to Hiroshima to be with my family. Birds are chirping, sun was out. It was the most beautiful, wonderful day. For you, it may be, if our effort against use of nuclear weapon fails, when it happens, or if it does happen, let's hope it doesn't. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Hideko, for your perseverance over the years. And I'd also just like to recognize Nihon Hidankyo. Our committee has sponsored over 100 delegations from Nihon Hidankyo and other hibakusha organizations as well, but primarily Nihon Hidankyo over the years. And I think probably more than 500 A-bomb survivors have come to give their testimony. So our commitment always has been, as long as the hibakusha are willing to, able to speak, it is our obligation to provide them with an opportunity because, as Hideko said, what happened to them, will happen to us unless we change the way that we think, as Einstein admonished us, and deal with this threat. And so today, even though the numbers of nuclear weapons are way down compared to back in 1982 when there were 60,000 or so nuclear weapons. Today it's more like 12,000 nuclear weapons. But if even a small percentage of them are used, it would result in a nuclear winter and the radiation that would be spread. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a minute's silence to remember Hiroshima and the exact instant of the bombing. Okay, thank you very much. I want to say at the top, I want to encourage everyone here to put any information that you have that you want the group to know about into the chat. I want to start out then uh, calling on Matt Meyer. So Leslie Kagan cannot be with us today, unfortunately. She had a family medical emergency involving someone in the hospital, and she just simply cannot be there. She gives her regrets, and we've already heard from Reverend Daughtry. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to Matt, have him talk about the big picture of organizing in New York City, all of the ins and outs. I'm going to give you a little bit of latitude and more toward the 10 minutes or even a little bit more in order to give us a complete picture. So why don't you start us off, Matt?
Well, so good evening, good morning to any of those joining us on August 6th in Japan right now. But for those on the East Coast of the United States, good evening. And thank you, John, Reverend Daughtry, always love and prayers to a fellow Brooklynite, and love to Leslie and to all of our colleagues and comrades here. I should start by saying that despite the long white beard, I'm actually the youngster. I'm the kid in the group, because in fact, my role with June 12th, 1982, was as the student and youth representative to the National Coalition. I was not nearly as well known. I knew Leslie because a couple of months earlier, she had hired me as a kind of really not a major staff person, but as a kind of assistant staff person of the National Mobilization for Survival. And only 2 years before that, I had gotten to be known in the New York and US left and progressive circles because I was a public draft registration resistor. But I represented the United States Student Association and the Progressive Student Network to the June 12th hearings. I looked rather differently then. I did have a beard, but it was much shorter and not white at all. And I had a full head of hair. So some years have passed, but my memories of building for June 12th are quite sharp and quite distinctive. And it's exciting to reflect back on those times with Reverend Daughtry and with Leslie here in spirit. We know that she in general maintains the work. And here in New York, we see one another at demonstrations ever so often. It's important to note that what has become known as, what was known at the time as the largest peace demonstration in US history up to that point, was built in very particular ways with very particular reasons. It was in part that anti-nuclear and nuclear weapons concerns were major and significant, but not just that. There were things about political organizing that I will talk about in the next few minutes that I think are significant, not just for those times and as a reflective sense of people's history, but for these times and what we need in terms of movement building and mobilization here in the 21st century in 2026 and beyond. So the first thing I want to say, and this is very much in regard to Reverend Daughtry and to what was at that point a newly formed organization that he led, the National Black United Front, but there is still the National Black United Front with their offices in Houston, Texas, and has been a Black United Front and many allied organizations since that time. And that is to simply say, as John, you well know, that the massive mobilization of 1 million people to the United Nations in Central Park on June 12, 1982, was in fact not one coalition. Ultimately, there were 3 coalitions that built that demonstration, at times with 3 very different and sometimes factionalized and kind of angry perspectives. The first, and I would say the foundational, was Mobilization for Survival. Mobilization for Survival, as I said, was the group that Leslie Kagan was the national coordinator of. She became the national coordinator of the June 12th March and mobilization, and really is the hero, Shiro, that held all the pieces together as much as possible, logistically, fiscally, politically, organizationally. Leslie will always go down in history as the glue that held that together, and not just that, many coalitions that Leslie was at the center of. But Mobilization for Survival began to exist during the United Nations Special Session on Disarmament 1, which had happened in the late 70s. And as the mainly progressive and mainly third world global South nations at the time looked at disarmament as a key and pivotal issue for human survival, led in part by Hibakusha, by Japanese, but also, as you said, by various African leaders and nations, including Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and many, many others. As we looked at the special session on disarmament, Mobilization for Survival formed as itself a coalition. U.S. Peace Council, War Resistance League, American Friends Service Committee, and other groups I'll talk about in a minute, came together to build for a smaller mobilization in the late 70s. And then, as it became clear that these same nations were going to hold a major second special session on disarmament at the UN in June of 1982, that they would mobilize a massive national mobilization for disarmament in New York around the 1982 SSD2. That became Mobilization for Survival's focus, and all of the organizations, all of the national and local and regional organizations, including the Washington Peace Center that John, you were part of, and many others are part of, built for this historic day. It's important to note that the Mobilization for Survival at that time, and this coalition does not still exist, but the Mobilization for Survival had 4 goals. Disarmament was part of an intersectional, interconnected series of goals. The 4 unifying goals of the MOB were stop the arms race, abolish nuclear weapons, ban nuclear power, and meet human needs. Again, abolish nuclear weapons, ban nuclear power, stop the arms race, and meet human needs. Those are the 4 unifying principles of the National Mobilization for Survival. By the way, it's also worth noting that the MOB, Mobilization for Survival, was itself an outgrowth, and the name was taken very much as an outgrowth historically of the Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam. And the forces that built the Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, like David Dellinger, like David McReynolds, like Norma Becker, and then as a young student, she was a student at that time, Leslie Kagan, became the Mobilization for Survival, which built June 12, 1982. However, at some point, 2 other coalitions emerged to also build for June 12, 1982. The first involved a split-off led by Cora Weiss, who at the time was affiliated with Riverside Church Disarmament Campaign, also including at that time the American Friends Service Committee representative, which was, I believe, Terry Province, and with the Sane Freeze representative, David Courtwright, and others, to make the focus very narrow and as specific as possible on nuclear freeze issues. I'll also come back to that in a moment. In the other direction, Mobilization for Survival had pushed to make things broad according to these 4 basic demands, and had hired in 1981 2 people who were instrumental in my life, and I think who also worked with Reverend Daughtry. They were Bob Brown and Mauna Soa Koyate, both leaders of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And Bob and Mauna moved to New York from Chicago and Boston. And actually, I think Bob was in Washington, D.C. at the time, to not just include the AAPRP in the organizing, but to make organizing of Black and African, of so-called third world people, people of color, a part and parcel of the work towards the mobilization. When some forces moved to make it narrower, many, many folks around Bob, Mauna, and others moved in the other direction to make it broader and deeper and focused on third world and progressive peoples. So a third coalition, which called itself the Third World and Progressive Peoples Coalition. John, you had the name a little bit off there, but I think history will show that it was called the Third World and Progressive Peoples Coalition, which National Black United Front and many, many other groups are part of, Puerto Rican Socialist Party, etc., became a third coalition. And history will show that despite the debates and differences and sometimes broad disagreements, in fact, unlike many of the moments in the 1960s movement against the war in Vietnam, 2 dates, 2 demonstrations did not emerge. Everyone ultimately converged on that one date, that one space, UN and then Central Park, June 12, 1982, to set aside differences, at least for that afternoon, Not all of them equally controlled the stage, but all of us were in the streets together with our signs and with our banners across ideological, across political, across generational, and across racial and ethnic, across geographic areas. And I think that idea, the idea of a coalition of coalitions and broad unity against nuclear weapons and against the continuation of nuclear weapons, whether it was focused on freeze or focused on the global south, that unity is what prevailed on that day. That's the first lesson. I'm going to say a few more, and then we'll let the conversation get a little more interactive. I think it's significant to understand that some history books are revised, a revisionist mistake by calling June 12, 1982, the nuclear freeze demonstration. It was not that. And though the freeze certainly built from and gained from that part of political energy, it was always a demonstration about abolishing all nuclear weapons, including unilaterally, as some folks believe, about connecting it to banning nuclear power, about stopping the arms race, and about meeting human needs. It was always about at least those four fundamental demands. And so the idea that this was the freeze demo is a historical error, and people should stop saying that and writing that in various history books that don't look carefully at history. The other thing is, beyond being a coalition of coalitions that included Pan-Africanists and Black nationalists and Puerto Rican socialists and others, it was also, and I think worth noting, something that also took leadership from some of the important progressive and radical states of the global south that were at the UN campaigning most fiercely for disarmament. It was also not just June 12th. June 12th was also June 13th and June 14th. So in addition to being a diversity of ideologies and peoples, it was also a diversity of tactics. So, for example, one of the organizations in the Mobilization for Survival, the War Resisters League, the group that I, several years later, became the national chairperson of, helped lead another little coalition, and I say little, but it wasn't so little at the time, called Blockade the Bomb Makers. And on June 14th, there was massive protests and civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience, and simultaneously at the 5 embassies of the 5 nuclear powers. That is to say, there were sit-down civil disobedience actions in front of the U.S. mission to the UN. That was the biggest one. That was the one I was arrested at. But also at the missions of the Soviet Union, China, Britain, and France. And that was the official position of the Blockade the Bomb Makers, June 14th, 1982, aligned civil disobedience action in order to not upset some groups that didn't want to do civil disobedience. It was not officially part of the June 12th coalition, but it was clearly aligned, run essentially by many of the same people out of many of the same offices and political demands. But not only that, there was even more folks who were not in that grouping who said, but wait, Israel and South Africa also secretly have nuclear powers, and so does India. So there were people in front of at least the South African and the Israeli missions to the UN also doing civil disobedience that morning. So again, we have a diversity of tactics across political ideological lines to say we're not just going to hold one, but many, but all of the nuclear powers responsible. Not necessarily equally. The largest demonstration by far was in front of the U.S. mission. Over 1,000 people got arrested that morning on June 14th to say we're going to put our bodies on the line to stop nuclear weapons and for disarmament. Some of the last things I want to say is this. What I'm saying about, I said June 13th and June 14th. All of my draft registration resistor friends would be very upset if I didn't mention what we were doing the day before. We were 17, 18. I was 19 years old, a couple of 20-year-olds. We had lots of energy. So not to rest between the 12th and the 14th, we held a massive, what we called anti-draft festival on June 13th. June 13th, I forget it. Why? I think it may have been at Judson Church. I forget exactly where, but we held a massive national convergence on the issue of draft registration and draft resistance. And as some people know, there are calls to now have an automatic draft. It's actually in the books to have in the US an automatic draft for everyone when they turn 18, which will essentially be a massive database of young people readying them for war. And so resisting, not just as conscientious objectors, but all manner of resistance for this automatic draft has to come up at this moment and should come up at this moment within the peace movement and peace organizations. And I would urge folks to look at the resistance.org and other resistance websites that I'll put into the chat for more information. But it really was a diversity of perspectives and tactics building towards June 12th. And I guess I'll conclude these opening comments by saying this. The idea of building across multiple lines of thinking, the idea of including and putting at the forefront people who are most affected, African, Asian peoples, the idea of including youth, having a 19-year-old on this national coordinating committee, this 19-year-old who they didn't know was going to grow up and become the national chair of the War Resistance League, or decades later, the national chair of Fellowship of Reconciliation, or as I became in these last years, the Secretary General of the International Peace Research Association. At the time, I was just a 19-year-old college student at New York University who was obviously very dedicated. I was a draft registration resistor, and I was somewhat outspoken. People had heard me talk on the radio and TV, so they knew I could string a couple of words together. But I was an untested person that got to sit with Reverend Daughtry and Leslie Kagan and Mauen Asoya and Bob Brown and all these others and learn a lot. And I'm still trying to learn, maybe teach a little bit, and hopefully build for the 21st century coalitions just as broad or broader, just as big or bigger, so that we can have peace in our time, not just nuclear disarmament, but nuclear disarmament as the center point to a world of justice, peace, and liberation for all.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I hope you can stay with us because I'm sure others are going to have some questions for you. So Elise Fisher is not with us. She was the director of the Peace Center when we were organizing here in DC. And, I give Elise a tremendous amount of credit for turning the Washington Peace Center from what was essentially a Quaker project into a true community center, an organizing hub in DC that involved many different organizations, and organizing for June 12th was central to that. But Matt, you don't know this, but you gave me a perfect segue to my story, my June 12th story, one small part of it, and that is that Louise, my wife, and I were Gray Panthers, and Louise and I took the responsibility of organizing the Gray Panther bus, and we sent the bus to New York, and I'll never forget going to the George Washington Bridge and coming downtown towards Central Park, and they had all the roads blocked off, and they wanted to dump off everybody a mile and a half north of the park and walk there and then go to a place. And Louise gets up in the front of the bus, and then police stop after police stop talked her way through because she says, we're Gray Panthers. We're really old. We can't walk there. And we got the bus there and got right to the park and dumped off right there. But that's not the segue. Segue is this. When we got there, Louise and I and some of the other Gray Panthers were networking with some of the other folks that were there. And there was a group of yippies and some youth and so on that were absolutely, I said, they did not want to forget about South Africa and Israel. So, and I don't think that I'm exaggerating in saying that Louise was the main agitator. And for those of you who knew Louise, Marie, you can understand how this might have happened. She organized a group of about 50 or 60 of us, and we formed two groups, and we did civil disobedience at both the South African embassy and the Israeli embassy. So I see your face, Marie. She's laughing. So my story with Mobilization for Survival goes back to when I was in Ann Arbor, and I was the political coordinator of the Arbor Alliance. And back in the day, back in the early and mid 70s, the Alliance movement an anti-nuclear power movement. So we were fighting against Fermi 2 in Monroe, Michigan. And it was very difficult to get other members of the Arbor Alliance to take on the issue of nuclear weapons. They just like some of the people in the Freeze movement wanted to make June 12th single issue, and not dealing with these other issues. A lot of my friends in the Arbor Alliance wanted to single issuedly focus on Fermi too. So it was kind of like pulling teeth. But in the late 70s, and I want to give a call out to Kitty Tucker. So Kitty Tucker was the director of Supporters of Silkwood, and she was really, I think, central in getting the anti-nuclear power movement to understand that nuclear weapons were also an important issue. And so part of the dynamic of the establishment of Mobilization for Survival came out of that struggle within the nuclear power movement to embrace the broader struggle against nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So I became one of the main coordinators of the Detroit, Michigan component of what we called Survival Summer. So there was, before that, there was the Coalition for a Non-Nuclear World, and I was part of a group of 45 people from Ann Arbor who camped out in Louise Franklin Ramirez's backyard in preparation for being arrested, and we were all arrested, and there were about 2,000 people, and to this day, that's the largest mass protest in Pentagon history. So all of this is to say, and to reinforce what Matt said, that all of this organizing with Mobilization for Survival, and before that, the Alliance movement created a lot of really good organizers, veteran organizers, and so I was involved in Coalition for Non-Nuclear World protest, more deeply involved in the protest against the Republican Convention in Detroit, and then. The long story short is I ended up meeting Louise when I was arrested in 1980, and then she had a heart attack the following, well, later that year, and asked for my help, and it was the second anniversary of 3 Mile Island. It's, I think, maybe March, and I caught the bus from Ann Arbor. I had no car, and then I put everything on my shoulders and caught the bus, and then got off the bus, and then got on the bus to DC. And so that's my story of getting involved in Mobilization for Survival. And then, of course, at that point, it was 81, and then it was 82, and we Louise and I, and many other groups, and there are some people actually on this call that I'm going to be calling on a little bit later to talk about, their perspective on this. So I just wanted to thank Matt because he gave me the perfect segue, and we invited some other people who are only peripherally involved in organizing in 82, but in their own way are important organizers. So one of the really important groups in Northern Virginia was the Center for New Creation. And one of the key organizers of the Center for New Creation was Marie Dennis. And, I can say that Louise and I spent many, many, many hours at the Center for New Creation in meetings. And I remember Marie sometimes bringing her kids there, and Margaret was there, and Joan was there, and so out of that came Justine Merritt and the ribbon campaign. So I want to ask Marie to talk a little bit about Center for New Creation, the faith organizing, and of course, talking about your later work at Mary Knoll and then with Pax Christi. So, Marie, will you talk with us a little?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you, John. Sorry I was a little bit late. The Center for New Creation was a very small, very ad hoc ecumenical center located physically in Northern Virginia, kind of intentionally between the Pentagon and the CIA. The purpose of it was to generate dialogue around critical issues, social issues, peace, economic justice, women's issues, Central American issues at the time in middle class communities in the Washington area and beyond. It was great training. It was a very interesting and sort of I think very deep process that we used to find ways to talk about issues that were absolutely critical in a way that could maybe move the conversation to a new place. So in the years that it existed, this actually still exists. The Center for New Creation has housed other projects like the Jubilee USA Network and a wonderful project in Nairobi and so on. But the main work of the Center for New Creation was disarmament with a strong focus on nuclear disarmament, Central America work, women's issues, feminism, and economic issues, economic justice issues. But it was a very, very small center, as John said. It brought together people often from very different communities to learn about each other's way of life and experience, and often would have visitors from other parts of the world just spend time with us. So one of the main projects that the Center for New Creation got involved with around nuclear disarmament was the Peace Ribbon. Justine Merritt, whose idea the Peace Ribbon was, found us and asked us if we'd organize the ribbon when it finally came together in Washington. As you may know, Justine traveled all over the United States, usually on a bus, meeting with local communities and starting a conversation in local communities about what people couldn't bear to think of as lost in a nuclear war. She invited people to represent on a pillowcase size piece of cloth, whatever that was, and to do it in whatever way made sense to them. So there was embroidery, there was painting, there were children's pictures, there were pictures, drawings of everything from pizza to families to mountains to trees to, you can imagine all kinds of things. So that as Justine moved around the country, she began to organize in every state a local group that would organize a peace ribbon at a state level. And in most states, there was an event where everybody who had made a ribbon piece in that state held it around the state house, calling for an end to nuclear weapons and for lasting peace. And then on the 40th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we organized the ribbon event in Washington. We had a quite wonderful. It was a mix of faith communities, disarmament organizations, organizations working for justice in Central America, feminist groups, and we all came together to initially. Justine's idea was to wrap the Pentagon in this ribbon of all that people could not imagine losing forever in the event of a nuclear war. And so we dutifully organized to wrap the ribbon around the Pentagon and began dealing with all of the different police and security forces in Washington. So we had to get permits from the Virginia State Police and the Pentagon Police and the Arlington County Police and the DC Police and the Park Police and the Secret Service and the Capitol Police. And when we first went into a meeting with all of the authorities and said, this is what we want to do in a couple of months, they started out by saying, there's no way on earth that we're going to let you do that, because it meant we were going to shut down the city. And so we said, well, all right. But we talked and talked and talked and talked and finally got the permits we needed to do everything that we needed to do. And we wrapped the ribbon around the Pentagon, across the Potomac River, all the way down the mall, around the Capitol building, back up the mall, around the ellipse by the White House, and back across to the Pentagon. And it included 3 sites that were organized by a different community of people. So one was organized by those who were focused on disarmament and peace issues. Another was organized by those who were focused on justice and an end to the U.S. wars in Central America. And the third was organized by the faith communities. It was an absolutely spectacular demonstration of beauty and creativity and what the depth of feeling that people had as they began to think about losing everything in the event of a nuclear war. It got, it was the middle of 1980s. There was no social media. We used walkie-talkies. There was there was nothing. The communication capacity was pretty limited. We got fairly decent media coverage, but it was not nearly as much as it could have been. There are still ribbon pieces that you will find in very interesting places now. They're in congressional offices on Capitol Hill. They're in museums. They're in offices of peace movements. Great pictures, thank you. So the ribbon was really quite phenomenal. It went. Justine was the mover behind it. It was her creativity. We did it on no money. It was, just completely volunteers all over the country. The ribbon then was picked up by a group at the United Nations that at first Church Women United and then others, so that the ribbon became an international movement. There was some international involvement during the original ribbon event. I remember a tremendous display of tulips from Holland that people had sewn onto ribbon pieces. But the ribbon continued, and it still exists in sort of at an international level. At the same time that the ribbon event happened in Washington, there was a similar event in Hiroshima. So there was a sort of bilateral effort. I think that's probably enough about the ribbon. It was absolutely beautiful. I remember looking through I think there were 27 miles of ribbon pieces when they were held together. And the art that was involved in them was just absolutely phenomenal. I remember the night before the event just being bowled over by the beauty that was brought together. So I think that's probably enough about the ribbon. Since then, I worked for 20 years for the Maryknoll Missioners, working all over the world, bringing their experience into shaping U.S. foreign policy. And then for the last 15 years or so, I've been working with Pax Christi International to move nonviolence to the center of Catholic Church teaching on war and peace. And we're actually making progress. So I think that's enough.
Yes, and so thank you, Marie. And I can testify. I was in the room when we presented our application for a permit, and the response was exactly the way that Marie said, that there's no way that we're going to do this, but we never gave up. And Center for New Creation deserves a tremendous amount of credit. And if you ever see Margaret, please give my regards. And
I'm not involved.
I do. I work with Margaret. I'm in touch with her very often. She works with Pax Christi as well, so I'll tell
And I
her.
and I was, I was in touch with Joan before she died at
Yeah,
a nursing home, maybe out in Winchester or something. I don't remember exactly
yeah.
where. But let me be, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out of order, and I'm going to ask Jack Gilroy to say a few words because it merges perfectly with what you're talking about. But Jack, before I call on you, I just wanted to talk about another small vignette about the ribbon. So we got a call from Trinidad Tobago from Peter Minshaw, and Peter Minshaw was the People's Grand Prize winner in Carnival, and he brought back a lot of the political component of Carnival that had been lost over the years. And he had two steel bands, and he had dancers featuring Madame Hiroshima, which was a character that was 12 feet tall with gigantic ostrich feathers, plumes. Uh, and so he wanted to come to take part in the ribbon. So we said, well, okay, let us get to work. So he wanted to bring two steel bands and then about 10 or 12 dancers. So we were talking 30 or 40 people. Tremendous logistical challenge. So we ended up getting Howard University to turn over a warehouse, and they did all of their organizing there. And on the day of the ribbon, we met with Peter and the bands and Madame Hiroshima at the White House, and we went down from the White House down to the mall and then joined the ribbon. So if you go on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee website, and I'll put that
Oh,
in the chat, you can see some pictures of Madame Hiroshima going down the Pennsylvania Avenue and enjoying the ribbon. So I just had to get that in there. So I'm going to go out of order. And Jack, I assume you and Paul and Marie know each other. So will you talk just a little bit about your project that you have?
Since I only have a few minutes, I won't go into my 60 years of organizing, and I don't think I can match most people who are here anyway. But basically, I have been a high school teacher whose students were called Gilroy's Guerrillas because we were in the streets, and not only in the United States, but in Australia, where we felt that, at least I told the kids, that they were successful in helping to prevent further French explosions in the Pacific because we were the only high school or university students who ever made the top of the news of the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Company. And they actually, the Steve Doers and the University of Sydney went out on strike afterwards. So many stories like that of climbing the fence at nuclear weapons areas. I've written a couple of books on conscientious objection, novels. I'm an ex-military person myself. I worked under Richard McSorley and Dan Berrigan and Phil Berrigan, so I think I walk in some pretty good shoes. I've always been a Pax Christi person, but Pax Christi is not the large organization, an active organization that maybe Big Peace Action, supposedly the largest in the country, that I often say sometimes is more peace talk. So we try to bring them into the streets, and we use not just people with signs, but actions that bring about news media. And so we're known to many people throughout the Southern Tier for getting our message out, whether it happens to be nuclear weapons or the merchants of debt. I have spent time in Southern jails, federal prisons, even a penitentiary, all for nonviolent actions. And also the author of plays about killer drones, some of which are actually done in New York City now, in upstate New York. All of that is important, but what really comes to play is discovering the Schiller Institute. And the Schiller Institute that has each week for the last 164, I think this is 165 weeks, the only group that I know of that actually has an active peace solidarity week of bringing in individuals from around the world, translating into 4 different languages every week. The Schiller Institute has that. So I look upon them as very important, as a very important solidarity group. And I've worked closely with individuals such as Ray McGovern, Jim Douglas. We now have a proposition. If we only have a couple of minutes here to tell you, I think it's a very important proposition. Our proposition is this, that we will try to bring about a conference between the major powers. The powers, of course, of Putin in Russia, Trump in the United States, the Xi Jinping of China. And the catalyst for this, we hope, and we're working very hard on this, will be Pope Leo, the American Pope. And we'll be working on this through Archbishop John Wester, who is by far the most outspoken American cleric on nuclear weapons. If you don't know John Wester, you haven't been paying attention. John Wester was this year named Pax Christi Teacher of the Year. The Pax Christi Teacher of the Year has individuals such as, Martin Sheen and individuals such as John Deere rather, and one of your people on here tonight, of course, Marie, was a teacher of peace. So there are many others I could rattle off, but the point is these are really great activists, people of honesty and truth, and many of them, like me, believe in the nonviolent Christ, and therefore, we work in that particular field. So what I proposed to the Schiller Institute just 3 weeks ago, on their 162nd, I guess, Peace Week on Friday morning, what I proposed was that we look at the history and look at the Cuban Missile Crisis and why the Cuban Missile Crisis is a lesson for us today. And we explained with quite a bit of study, and again, Jim Douglas was involved in this as well. So, and Ray, in helping me write the letter to a degree was Ray McGovern, and another Pax Christi person of New York State, Rosemary Pace. So I was in good company in getting this together. But the letter specifically asked in very courteous terms, not demanding, but asking, please, Archbishop Wester, with your experience, with the admiration that people around the world have for you, and especially in Los Alamos, where you are the Archbishop of New Mexico, would you please use your office and your skill and your knowledge and your compassion to speak with the American Pope Leo to bring about a Vatican conference or a neutral place such as Geneva or Vienna, a conference between Putin, Xi Jinping, and Trump, and possibly the Secretary General of the United Nations. But mainly those individuals who are now bringing us so close to the point of nuclear confrontation that some of our leading people, such as American University, Peter Kuznick is the chair, or the director rather, of nuclear studies at American University, believes that it's not 80 seconds or 60 seconds. It's probably more like about 30 seconds to midnight. It's very close. Jim Douglas was so irritated when he talked. He said it's almost like it's a second or two away. Why? Because Poland is asking for nuclear weapons along the border of Russia. Lithuania is asking for nuclear weapons along the border of Russia. Finland will, through their parliament, soon say that they can accept nuclear weapons along their border. And of course, you have the mess that's going on with Iran and with Israel, that everyone knows that they have nuclear weapons and the possibility of them using it if they are pushed to the limit by well-armed Iran. So all of these factors make it very, very difficult. So what do? We are asking then that this letter, and the letter is available for anybody who would want to read it. They can go on. The Schiller Institute has been giving us marvelous help assisting peace. Pax Christi. Pax Christi, New York State originated, and without the help of the Schiller Institute, we would not have this huge number of organizations. We have the leader of ICANN who has signed on. People like Ann Welch or sorry, help me out. Ann from Hawaii, the former Army colonel.
Ann Wright.
Ann Wright. Why can't I think of Ann Wright? I know her personally. Ann Wright. Ann Wright actually acted in one of my plays. Ann Wright is on there. So I won't go through a litany of all the people involved, but the organizations and the individuals are really first class, truly peaceful people looking for something out of the box to bring diplomacy about. We have just earned, for example, our Veterans for Peace organization, the distinction of being the best performing organization in Veterans for Peace for 2026. One of the many reasons is that we are we have the only children's peace fair. Now, make sure you hear the word peace, because if you Google, you'll find children's fairs, but there's only one that's peace fairs. Part of that comes from the fact that I was 10 years old when Hiroshima bomb dropped, and I had no compassion. I was taught, it was ingrained in me that all of this was perfectly okay. So we're moving today, 2026, to this concept of somehow being able to bring together that same sort of moral teaching that occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Nikita Khrushchev was approached by Pope John the 23rd. Pope John the 23rd gave a speech on October 22nd at Vatican Radio. Khrushchev, the atheist who hated the West, he actually had it published in Pravda. It didn't come about just by accident. It was through the actual covert operation of JFK with his friend Norman Cousin, and Norman Cousin working with a Belgian priest by the name of Father Felix Morland, who was an advisor to John the 23rd. So these things didn't just happen mysteriously. They happened through covert action. We are not being so covert about this. We are asking Archbishop John Wester to please try to contact the Pope, try to talk to him in person, and to bring about a conference. Is it an out-of-the-box thing? Well, not totally if you look at who has signed on. And it's very impressive. And I hope that maybe you guys and your organization, Marie has already signed on, but you would take a look at it. And I think you can find it in the chat, the address where you can find the letter.
Yeah, and thank you, Jack. And for the record, I signed the letter as well on behalf of the Hiroshima Peace Committee. Paul Magno was a member of the Plowshares and is a member of the Plowshares. And that was a really, really important underpinning to everything that all of the rest of us did. So, Paul, if you could talk briefly about the Plowshares movement.
Sure. And I don't know how many people are acquainted with it. I know a good number of people on this that are on screen tonight know who we are. And I live 2 doors down from Marie Dennis, so she knows a little something about us, and I know a lot about her, and glad to listen to her tonight. I've been involved in the Plowshares movement since the early 1980s, and the Plowshares movement began in 1980 with a group of mostly Catholic activists from headlined by folks from Jonah House, Philip and Dan Berrigan, and 6 other folks, going into a weapons factory in Pennsylvania where the Mark 12A warheads, which are first strike nuclear warheads for intercontinental ballistic missiles, were being manufactured. They let themselves in with the morning shift and were able to take household hammers to a couple of prototypes that they found in an engineering room. They were able to splash blood on blueprints that were on those tables. And they were able to do something that the superpowers hadn't done in the entire history of the nuclear era, which is to begin a little bit of disarmament. In 1980, I was 2 years out of college and trying to get my footing. But that action resonated with me immensely. And I kind of set my course for trying to get to know more about who those people were and what they were about. I'd met Philip and Daniel Berrigan when I was in college. Jack mentioned Dick McSorley, a Jesuit priest who was my mentor, and once upon a time, chaplain to President Kennedy. And so he kind of sent me in the right direction. When people were organizing for 1982, there had been a couple of plowshares actions, but there was a lot of ferment in Washington. John has recalled some of that, that got people on the bus to New York. I wasn't one of them because I was the newest member of our Catholic Worker House in Washington, St. Francis House at the time. And so I got to take care of the home front while everybody else in our little community of Catholic workers went to New York for several days, including another draft registration resistor named Jim Seymour, who gave a great speech at St. Paul's Church while they were up there. Made us all proud. But by the time, so within a month of that 1982 mobilization and massive civil disobedience, and a phenomenon that I really appreciated watching it devolve in Washington, that carried the voice of the global South, poor people, dispossessed people, people who weren't white, had their voices amplified and made a decisive mark on the character of that mobilization. And I took, even though I missed the party, I took that to heart. And I also ended up listening to Philip Berrigan a little bit, who used to tell us that white skin is not for hiding out from the world. We have to find a way to be responsible and engage and do better than our country does, as far as being peaceful, truthful, risk-taking people in terms of action and nonviolence. And Phil Berrigan and Liz McAllister were the stalwarts who started Jonah House in the waning years of the Vietnam War in Baltimore. And what Jonah House fostered in the 70s and in the 80s that led to the Plowshares movement was a culture of resistance, and continuity. And they had turned their attention to the nuclear arms race, but they were in and out of jail in the 70s and the 80s and onward repeatedly for actions such as the Plowshares actions. And so within months, later in the same year, that mobilization happened in June. A group of activists struck the electric boat Trident submarine factory in Connecticut in July, and a second group followed them in November. And by Christmas, there were 16 of them in Connecticut's prisons for those two actions. And after that, the Plowshares movement became a continuity. By the middle of the 1980s, there were over 20 people in federal prison for Plowshares actions, for at least 5 different Plowshares actions around the country, including myself, serving some of us 1 or 2 years. The most onerous sentences we ever experienced were those issued against Carl Cabot and Helen Woodson, who acted in Kansas City at a missile silo, and they got 18-year sentences. um, which was pretty staggering. But that movement has continued on over 40 years, and I've been involved in supporting it and encouraging it and teaching about it. And over those 40 years, there have been 100 such actions around the world, mostly in the United States. I had the privilege in the last 12, 14 years of leading support groups for both the Transform Now Plowshares, who made an incursion into the Y-12 nuclear facility in Tennessee in 2012, and the Kings Bay Plowshares, who similarly got to the Kings Bay Navy base in Georgia, where the East Coast Trident submarines are ported. Paying attention to the nuclear arms race is something that's, I feel like is not happening very much these days. And it's scary. We spent a lot of time learning about the nature of the weaponry, and the nature of the policy is very different than what the government advertises, of course. And many of you know this. First strike weaponry is what was being manufactured and deployed, and it's still what they rely on. And the principle is that if there's any, it's not defensive, it's not deterrent. It's every intention of trying to decapitate an adversary such as Russia or maybe China, and using the accuracy of the weapons that they now have, and the even better accuracy and range that the next generation will have, to threaten to burn down the planet, as Phil Berrigan put it. And he used to tell us that, our first order of business is to make sure we don't burn down the planet. So this kind of direct action, nonviolent resistance, personal risk was essential to those actions and to that movement. And it fed on the energy of the mass opposition to nuclear weapons that was so extensive in the 80s. We had a high point of number of people in jail in the mid 80s, and a couple of years later, Gorbachev and Reagan did the unthinkable. They actually made an agreement to dismantle a set of nuclear weapons, the Euro missiles, the SS-20s and Pershing IIs that were deployed pointing across Europe at each other, and bringing us mighty close to nuclear Armageddon. I want us to pay attention to the fact that the nuclear threat still is the undergirding of so much of our empire. And the fact that the United States and Russia and Israel have nuclear weapons is half the reason why they can wreak havoc in the world the way they do. People, they have a license. They have a license to wage war. They have a license to kill. And if they and they have the arsenals to terrorize most of the world along the way, and that hasn't let up, even as new issues have taken our attention as activists over the decades. I'm mindful that we have another generation of nuclear weapons. We're at the cusp of that. The Trident submarines will be the Ohio class Trident submarines will be replaced by the Columbia class submarines, sadly named after our nation's capital, the first of them. The USS District of Columbia will be the first of the post-Trident ballistic missile submarines. And there'll be new generations of intercontinental ballistic missiles called the Sentinel. There's a new warhead coming along from the very same weapons factory that the Berrigans broke into in 1980, now under the auspices of Martin Lockheed. And not too imaginative, the new warheads that will be placed on Sentinel ICBMs and perhaps on other missile systems is called the Mark 21A. They've only transposed two numbers, and they're using the same assembly line, and they're making the same earth-threatening, omnicidal weaponry, that I think we need to continue to figure out how to resist directly. I think that direct action resistance is something that was a gift from Jonah House and the Berrigans to the movement, and I think it's served us well and kept many of us sharp and committed for a long, long time. So that's my brief presentation of, one piece of the ongoing anti-nuclear movement. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. And so another segue here. So the ABM treaty was negotiated by Nixon and think it was Brezhnev, and then the NPT, not the NPT, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, the Pershing and cruise missiles, and about 4 times that number of Soviet missiles were negotiated out of existence, and those two agreements were really the bedrock of all of the nuclear weapons agreements. And Bush Jr. abrogated the ABM treaty, which many of us believe was the most important because it lowered the threshold to a nuclear first strike. Because if you have an ABM system, that signals the other side. Whether or not that it would work, that's irrelevant. It's just the idea that that means we can shoot first, and anything you shoot back of us, we're going to shoot down. So that was gone. And then the other one was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, which prohibited these intermediate range missiles off the coast or off of Russia and off the coast of the U.S. and that those meant that the warning times were less than 5 minutes if there were ever a nuclear exchange. So those two are gone now. Trump got rid of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force, and we have the NPT still. But for those of us who religiously go to the review conference, the NPT review conference has become almost a joke because the nuclear powers have not, in any sense, lived up to their obligation of total and complete disarmament. So that ends the part of our program that with the formal presentations, and it opens it up to the group. And we have about 45 minutes or so. I don't want to go too long after 9. As long as someone wants to talk, we'll stay on. We are recording this. This will be posted on the Hiroshima Peace Committee website for future reference for researchers and so on. We felt that this was a really important story to be told. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to call on individuals for our discussion part of the program, and I'm going to get to everybody. So a few people I promised I would call on, so I want to call on Pat Salisbury. Jack talked about the Schiller Institute's International Peace Coalition. They've been doing this about 2 years or maybe more than 2 years, and they're bringing together a really pretty wildly diverse group of peace activists of all different political persuasions, and the only requirement is a sincere commitment to peace. So Pat, if you can talk 2 or 3 minutes about the International Peace Coalition.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. I think the best way to talk about the International Peace Coalition is to invite you all to the Friday meeting, which is at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And among the distinguished speakers will be Mr. John Steinbach, because we are devoting a great portion of this meeting to the question of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, putting that forward as something to be avoided. I think Jack very eloquently gave a sense of how close we are to thermonuclear war at this point. It's not just that armaments are being built up and so on. We are actually headed towards thermonuclear war, and the intention of the IPC is to stop that from happening. to put it very simply. I would like to just say anybody who is concerned about cults or whatever, which I saw mentioned for some reason in the chat, might certainly come to the meeting and make their own judgments on these issues. In case you think there's something stealthy going on, the keynote is always given by Helga Zepp LaRouche. So the question of Helga and who of course is Lyndon LaRouche's widow, this is totally upfront for everyone to examine. So I hope to see you all there. I would just like to say that we had a very extraordinary, the IPC sponsored with the Schiller Institute, a very extraordinary roundtable. The title was Solve the Immigration Crisis Through Development, and it brought together people from throughout the entire world. 14 nations from 4 continents were represented, in some cases by official government representation. That would include, for example, China, where there was a representative of the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., and also Iran, where one of the officials from the Mexican embassy in Iran, in Mexico City, spoke. Now, what was interesting is wherever people came from, and whatever their perspective or whatever they were facing, they devoted themselves to the question of how this immigration crisis, which is the same issue as solving the crisis of poverty and underdevelopment throughout the global majority. So, for example, the Iranian embassy official, who you might have expected to spend 10 minutes talking about the war and so on, did not. He talked about the need for development and endorsed one of the proposals made by the Schiller Institute and authored by Lyndon LaRouche many decades ago, called the Oasis Plan for Middle East Peace. All this is on the Schiller Institute website. So please, if you have questions in mind, but better than that, because we are trying to bring together all elements of the peace movement. And I think we could all agree that whatever the great accomplishments, and many of them have been described tonight, those are battles that were won, but the war for peace has yet to be won because we're on the brink of thermonuclear annihilation. So that's our intention. Join us Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. I'd also like to very quickly invite you to a very important event we're holding in New York City. This is going to be on 9/11. It is going to be a classical music concert. And I think partly, this is a long discussion, but people here have referenced the difficulties of organizing others at this point. I mean, why aren't there millions of people in the street right now? Well, one of the reasons is they are so depressed, they are so demoralized, they are so far removed from the sense of human creativity that they are not motivated, to fight for the continuation of our human species. So to begin to remedy that problem, we have a cultural program. This will include the great Beethoven Ninth Symphony. It will be performed by amateur musicians, both from the Schiller Institute Chorus and others. And as many of you probably know, this is based on the poem by none other than Friedrich Schiller, for whom the Schiller Institute was named, and has the great refrain that all men will be brothers, which I think is something that everyone here has devoted their life to fighting for. So 9/11, New York City, and that information again will be available on the Schiller Institute website and at the IPC meeting. So I know I went a little long, but I think it was justified given some of the remarks in the chat, and thank you all for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. So Matt, you raised your hand again, so let's go back to Matt.
Well, a couple of comments, since we got to hear some from some others. First of all, I appreciate all of those who spoke and love Marie's comments about Prax Christi. Well, before Prax Christi, some of her work pre-Prax Christi, but about organizing and grassroots organizing. And of course my dear brother Paul's and the Plowshares movement, which was a movement both of profound organizing and of nonviolent direct action. Listen, I just put into the chat the correct direct link to the call to the Pope, appreciating that initiative. And especially I did that, I waited because I was going to say something about the Schiller Institute and Lyndon LaRouche, but I really appreciate that Patricia, that Pat just did that. I think it's vitally important if we're going to look at the spirit of June 12th and what we need today to be frank and honest with one another. So just putting off the Schiller Institute as this great body, as Jack did, could be true for some. For others, Lyndon LaRouche's history and even the current work of Schiller is problematic. I would say that as long as we're clear about who we are and who we're working with. And I love what that Pat just said. And I reiterate, if people have concerns, come and see and check it out and see. That's the attitude we should have. So given that context, I put the direct link in. I've worked with some folks from Schiller, especially with some initiatives regarding some Russian colleagues and comrades. I've also worked with people who are very opposed to it, who are closely connected to the Chinese parties. But I think what we need at this moment more than anything, and this is the main point I raised my hand, listening to some of these initiatives, is to break beyond these individual initiatives, especially those that are most top-down organized. The reason that the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, the reason that Nihon Hidankyo, the reason that International Peace Research Association, Plowshares, most fundamentally for this conversation, the reason that June 12, 1982 worked is that these were people's campaigns bottom up. That's what they are, and that's what we need to build. In the late 1970s, out of the movement against the war in Vietnam, as John, you know so well, and in mobilization for survival and other formations, the key was to build unity amongst our organizations. We weren't that far off. Fellowship of Reconciliation, War Resistance League, Women's International League, AFSC, the church groups, Pax Christi. Even when we went a few steps further to All African People's Revolutionary Party, Black United Front, and others, we weren't ultimately so far off. But we still needed to have regular spaces, regular moments when we sat down together and met. And that barely happens anymore. Everyone's in their own silos with their own campaigns, their own initiatives, their own projects. And I would say the project regarding Pope Leo is a significant one, an important one. But I think most important for the U.S. for this moment, whether we're aligned with this organization or another, with this superpower or another, with an end of all superpowers and looking at a multipolar world, maybe a world that has more focus on the global South, on Africa and Asia, than on some of our U.S. and European leaders. That is about the rebuilding of our classic peace coalitions. It's about building new coalitions for today and tomorrow. And that we are not doing. We're hardly doing. And we need all of us here and a whole bunch more to do that. It's part of why I agreed to be on this show, and because I also see in the legacy of the Washington Peace Center what the Hiroshima Committee does. And I guess I'll end by saying this. I didn't speak much about my current work, but I'll take a moment to do that now. I've been most recently in the U.S. outside of International Peace Research, which is a global South-oriented peace academic group. That here, in the U.S. at this moment, there's both a new group coming along the way. I think one of it's essentially its founder, Diane Perlman, is here on the chat. So Transcend US a group that is looking at the Johann Galtung and peace academic model, but working with activists as well. It is a group worth checking out. And then in terms of coalitions, I've worked for most of the last several years with a group that Paul's well aware of, and Maria a little bit as well, the Spirit of Mandela Coalition, that most recently held a major mobilization in Atlanta, Georgia, looking at 250 years, not just celebrating the Declaration of Independence, but looking at 250 years of resistance to colonialism, genocide, and the rule of kings. So I'll put those. I'll put the Spirit of Mandela website in the chat, as well as information about my two latest books, which talk a little bit about June 12th and Bob Brown and Mauna Koyate. But just to say, by a little word of the coalitions I think we need to have. In the room at the interfaith morning of July 4th in Atlanta, we had with us Reverend Lucas Johnson of the National Elders and Is America Possible, Vince Harding's image group. We had with us Reverend Chris Nye, who's the interim acting executive director of Fellowship of Reconciliation USA. We had with us Reverend Ralph Abernathy's family, Kwame Abernathy and others. But we also had with us former political prisoners from the Black Liberation Army, from the Puerto Rican Armed Forces of National Liberation, really from the whole spectrum of the Kingian and Malcolm Black Liberation Movement, from the Puerto Rican movements, from different parts of the white peace and justice and liberation movements in the same room, talking about building broad unity across ideological lines. It's this kind of coalition, this kind of across our silos. Not that we shouldn't keep doing the work that each of our groups is doing, but we have to in some ways cut through and build broad coalitions and build broad unities. That's the lesson of June 12th, and that's what it's going to take to turn this particular nuclear, militarized, authoritarian monster around.
Thank you, Matt. So for the record, the only paper period I only subscribe to Nuke Watch and Monthly Review, which is a Marxist-Leninist socialist magazine. But I regularly visit the American Conservative. These are paleo conservatives, and oftentimes they have very thoughtful essays on war and on nuclear disarmament. I also visit antiwar.com, and they are primarily the libertarian anti-war activists. And I visit sites like Black Agenda Report and Margaret Kimberly. And I also, one of my main blogs is Naked Capitalism, which is really good in terms of a whole lot of links and bringing issues together. But the point is, and for the record, I've been doing this kind of research my whole life. So I want to thank you for your words, Matt.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's why John can pull together so expertly this kind of a forum that can get Reverend Daughtry and me and Paul and Leslie and Jack and Patricia and others who couldn't make it tonight but would have because Jack called on us. That's why Jack can do that. And that's why we need John can do that. And that's why we need more John Steinbecks and more of this kind of energy across the lines, because you're reading that diverse number of texts is just a shadow of you talking to all of us so wonderfully and connectively over all these decades. So John, really a tribute to you. It's not just what you've read, but what you've done and our respect for you and appreciation that can begin to bring together the kinds of coalitions that, that we need.
All right. And in the spirit of bringing us together and recognizing that we're almost 20 to 9, and we said we didn't want to go too much beyond 9. I want people to really try to observe, say, a 2 to 3 minute limit. So Diane Perlman's name was brought up. And so why don't we do a natural segue? And Diane, if you could talk for 2 to 3 minutes about your work and your reflections on where we are and where we're going. Diane.
Hi, good to see you, John, and everybody. And thanks, Matt. Matt has been serving as my founding co-chair and now going to be working on U.S. foreign policy in the global South. All right. So anyway, I was in Central Park on June 12th, 1982 with my 2-year-old daughter in a stroller, came in from Philadelphia. And I got involved in the nuclear issue. I was awakened by Helen Caldicott the year before at University of Pennsylvania, the bombing run, which shocked me and changed my life. I've also been going to all the UN Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty conferences that have been in New York since 2000, representing civil society and hanging out with all the NGOs there. And I just want to say, and also the ban treaty in 2017. And in November, there's going to be another conference on the ban treaty, but also nuclear and WMD free zone in the Middle East conference. So by background, I'm a clinical psychologist and also political psychologist, and I've been in the field of conflict transformation. And as Matt mentioned, inspired by the work of Johann Galtung, who's considered a founder of the field of peace studies and conflict transformation. And the way that what I try to bring into the UN and what transcend US intention is that working on instead of the symptoms, not in addition to, not instead of, but working on the underlying causes of conflict. So, like first order changes, like getting rid of nuclear weapons and alert and all of that, which is important and which I'm involved in, but also looking at what are the conflicts about, what do the parties want, identifying legitimate goals, and working on reducing tension. So, in a way, nuclear weapons are like a scab. So, like if you try to pick them off, it'll grow back. But if the wound heals, then it'll fall. Like if we work through if we communicate and analyze the conflicts. I mean, Janssen was analysis, diagnosis, prognosis, and therapy. So it's like political therapy. If we reduce tensions, then we don't have to be afraid of everyone's nuclear weapons. Of course, we all know that there's big weapons contractors and forces driving that. And I'll just say one more sentence. So that Transcend US, it's focused in DC around the think tanks, but also dealing with policy. And that all of the graduate programs and the think tanks and Congress, all of our policies are around coercion. So like sanction and punishment, sanctions, deterrence, and they all often have the opposite effect of increasing tension and escalating. So it's sort of looking at conflict dynamics. And I always see John at the vigil. I mean, at the vigils that we have. This year, the American Psychological Association is meeting in Washington, so I don't know about the vigil Saturday night, but if I can come, I'll bring people. But
All right. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate that very much. So Mel Hardy had his hand up. So Mel is a key member of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee, and he does a huge amount of work in bringing the arts, the creative arts spirit into the movement for nuclear disarmament and for peace. So Mel, if you can talk 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, very briefly, and thank you very much, John. This is really masterful the way that you have organized this, John. Thank you very much. But I would also want to point out I'm associated with the All Souls Church Unitarian, which is the repository of the Hiroshima children's drawings. That is a body of artwork. And the leadership of that group, we have 2 other persons online, Chuck Woolridge and Judith Bauer, who are also online, associated with these drawings. The reality of another coalition partner that could very well be important in helping us to move the movement are the creative institutions. If we think about those of us who are in any way adjacent to the creative life, we have to protect creatives. We have to protect creation. So this is a very important gathering that has been assembled here, John. We thank you very much for this assemblage. I'm honored to be associated with you and the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee. I'm honored to be associated with many of you who I see in some of these groupings. There will be another vigil tomorrow in front of the United Methodist Church building. There are many, Chuck is associated with that as well. So thank you very much, John. I appreciate it, and best wishes on the rest of this gathering.
Yeah, and if memory serves me right, this is at least the second annual such gathering at the United Methodist Church, and I encourage everyone to get there. Ellen Thomas raised her hand. So Ellen has been key in organizing this uh, meeting tonight. She is a co-host, also recognizing Jonah Blaustein, one of our Hiroshima committee members. So Ellen is a key organizer for Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but importantly, she was key to the Peace Park Anti-Nuclear Vigil over the years, and she was married to William Thomas. So, and now, we were there, beginning with Reagan, and then Clinton, Carter, and then Bush, and all of the presidents until now, Trump, and now Trump has shut it down. So that's kind of emblematic of where we are. So, Alan, speak for 2 or 3 or even 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, John. I don't think I'll speak that long. It's really great to see all these faces that I remember for so many years, and it's wonderful to be with you all. I just want to comment on something that Diane said, which was that, of course, we have to worry about the military contractors, and we got to remember Proposition 1, and Eleanor Homes Norton has introduced a bill every session since 1994 after the successful DC Initiative 37 that we vigilers out in front of the White House brought to the people, along with the help of other people who pitched in, including Louise and Joe Butler and all sorts of folks who helped out with it. Norton is retiring this year, and there's a group called Warheads to Windmills that's working hard on trying to get co-sponsors for the bill, which now calls for the president to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and for the money to be used, as it has always said, the money is to be used to clean up the nuclear mess and to provide carbon-free, nuclear-free energy and other human needs. And so, if we can figure out a way to get these military industrialists to realize that the taxpayers will pay for them to transform their industries to mass producing carbon-free, nuclear-free energy instead of weapons, it would be very good for the economy and for the world. And so please pitch in. I put disarmchair@wilfus.org in the chat. Please get in touch with us if you are interested in helping with this. We need we need to have a sponsor when Norton is gone, and we're not sure whether whoever replaces her is going to do it. So please be aware of this and help out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So I'd like to recognize Jim Wagner, who is activist with the Friends and also a key member of the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee. And Jim's going to talk a little bit about some of the mass organizing that's going on today. So Jim, if you can speak for, no more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I greatly appreciate all the comments. This is great. Exactly what we need in my mind. Just a couple of, I try to stay with the forest and not get down too far into the trees, but I definitely agree with Matt regarding the need for collaboration. Well, that's obvious. However, a couple of things on that. The conference plan with the Pope, I hope it could be maybe expanded to an interfaith conference. Many of the major religions of the world, it should at least be invited. If that's part of it, apologies, I didn't catch that. And then I will say that over the last year, we've had a real collaboration of both faith and civil society groups in the lead up to the expiration day of the New START Treaty, which, as everyone knows, has expired. So just try to say that there is that positive momentum going on, and there are, of course, some big movements trying to get going. The largest one and most time-wise effective has been the Back from the Brink campaign. And people are familiar with that. If you look it up, look up preventnuclearwar.org. Another one is Students for Nuclear Disarmament. So that's a very hopeful youth movement. And then the third, to me, is this Halt and Reverse campaign, started by the Arms Control Association, endorsed by many groups, including Back from the Brink, Pax Christi, FCNL, many faith and civil society groups. The idea is very similar to the 1980s freeze movement, to halt, calling on all the nuclear powers to halt while we're at least agreed to parity, since, we're here. No one's launched any missiles. To freeze, basically, they're calling it halt, and then work for reductions. So the new term is reverse. So halt and reverse. Curiously, the Back from the Brink resolutions have that phrase on them. These are the HRES 317 and SRES 323 in Congress that many are familiar with. So I encourage people to look into those avenues. There are some things afoot. I suggest we link this to the environment as best we can, and there's some ways to do that. So I'll put my email in the chat, and let's communicate further. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jim. So I'd like to call on another experienced activist, if I may, and that's Judith Bauer. It's really good to see that Judith is on the call. So if you can speak for 2 to 3 minutes about your reflections and your thoughts, Judith. Thank you.
Yes, we've known John for a long time when he brought groups of Hibakusha over to All Souls, where I was at that time the church administrator. And that's how we first got together. And he would bring them to see what Mel just spoke about, the Hiroshima children's drawings. Those back in 1947, the church gathered a number of school supplies because they had heard that children were just lacking in everything. And as a response, one of the recipients sent just a group of drawings and to our children. And so we've kept those drawings from 1948, and we have taken reproductions over to donate to the school that still exists there in Hiroshima. We have also managed to have a working relationship with one of the Buddhist groups there, Rishi Kosai Kai, and we have been doing work together. They are very much against nuclear weapons, and so we have joined with them. And it's been one of the things that has, made us truly spiritual people, because we have these relationships. So I just want to say that our work continues. And one of the things that kind of bothers me when we have these meetings is we do not have enough young people who are involved in these movements today. They're forgetting what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's become, something that's way back there in the past, and they do not realize how much danger we are in today. So I would urge all of us to do whatever we can to get younger people aware and active. We're talking about the things that happened in the 80s and, 70s and 60s. We need to have a movement that is talking now about what's going on in this century. So I urge all of us to do whatever we can in that way.
Well,
Thanks.
yeah, Judith, it's good to see your face, and thank you. And you've given me a perfect segue because we do have a youth on the program, and this is someone I met at the Carter School at George Mason, which is also my alma mater. And Mel works very closely, and that's Yoshimi Noda. So, Marge, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
All right. Would you like to say a few words? You're
No, thank you. I've enjoyed listening to it. Glad to be part of it, but I don't have anything to add.
Marge and Bert John were key early members of our committee. And she's been feeling under the weather, and we'll miss you this year at the Nagasaki Vigil, but you'll be in our hearts. So thank you very much. And then is Lucy Duff on?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucy. Talk. Lucy's another one of our key early members. Almost, I would dare to say, almost a founding member. And Lucy and Woody and Jesse. You were part of the family. So, can you give us some reflections and also what's going on in Greenbelt?
Well, I don't keep up with Greenbelt so much. Marge can do that, but a fine experience of reflecting back on 1982 and all those buses. And good to hear about the continuing work from so many of you.
Well, thank you very much, and say hi to Woody. All right. Is Yoshimi there? Yoshimi Noda. If you're there, I'd like you. But Yoshimi is a young activist, grad student at George Mason. So why don't we do this? We got maybe 10 more minutes. I'd say no more than that. Matt's got his hand up. If anyone wants to speak, Diane Blaze or anyone else, if you want to say any words, please raise your hand. Matt, you want to say a few words in closing?
I only want to say something if Yoshimi's not here. Basically, to respond on a positive note, because I know we've only got a couple minutes left, to something Judith said, which I completely agree with about young people. But I think sometimes we don't always know exactly where to look. I'm excited that Spirit of Mandela Coalition has a bunch of young people from universities, but also youth groups that are not university based. And I think that speaks to some of what Reverend Daughtry said at the top end and what you yourself said, John, at the top end. When we link peace and justice issues, when we look at things holistically, when we build broad coalitions beyond our individual organizations, there is a group of younger people, there's a new generation coming in. But even simply and just on the disarmament issue, groups like ICANN, and here in New York at least, the key ICANN folks who are based at the program at Pace University in downtown Manhattan, have a very robust group of young people every year, a new crop of not just seniors, but college freshmen and others who are getting involved in this issue. So we need to do exactly what you said. We need to dig deeper and look further and bring them in. But all is not lost. I feel like it's a little more positive than Judith you put out there, because there are young people to be found and to bring into this work. We have to empower them. We have to give them leadership permission to do things on their own and to lead us. But they're out there.
Yeah, so I was actually a couple weeks ago. There's a group in DC called the Pan African Community Action (PACA), and they have a little church front office, and they were having a program on climate change and the impact on Southeast DC, and that's an issue that I know something about. And one of my old friends, I'd like to think one of my proteges, Netfa Freeman, is the organizer, and it's all young people, all people in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and doing work the old way, actually doing wheat pasting and doing individual phone calls and so on. So there is a lot of youth action out there, and we just need to keep our ears open and keep our minds being creative. Oh, it's now 9 o'clock. So if anyone wants to say a word, Diane, would you like to say a word?
I would, thank you. This has been so interesting. So Matt Meyer was a guest speaker at a Founding Mothers Movement meeting, Congress, and I just wanted to say that we are going to be celebrating the World Children's Day with the Children's Day of Peace on November 20th. And so Jack spoke about Children's Day. Anyway, so I just want to say we are going to be celebrating that coming up, and we want to have everyone involved. And we started off with a children's walk for peace, but we're going to make a children's day for peace. So we're going to have art contests and lots of things. So I just wanted to put that out. And I am running for Congress. That's why I put in Virginia's 11th congressional district. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And Diane is a longtime WILF activist. And, a final segue, and that is that MJ Park was on the call and she dropped off, and I was going to call on her. I don't see her on anymore, but she and her husband formed the Little Friends for Peace. And for years and years and years, they would come out on Hiroshima Day and help float the candles. And for years and years and years and years and years, I would bring A-bomb survivor, Louise and I, and then I continued the work. We would bring hibakusha to the kids, and we would introduce them as this is a friend of Sadako and the 1,000 paper cranes, because we would teach them how to fold paper cranes in preparation and told them the story of Sadako, and then we would introduce the hibakusha as a friend of Sadako. So, it just takes a lot of work, continuing work, and we need to support each other, and we need to keep our minds open, and we need to I think the most important thing is building broad coalitions. And there is a history, last word, and that is if you look back to the old anti-imperialist league back against the Spanish-American War. The idea was that the people did not want a U.S. empire, and they formed a wildly broad coalition ranging from the populists to even some of the corporate magnates. All came together in the name of anti-imperialism, and the U.S. should not become an imperial nation. And so that could be a pattern for some of our future organizing, working together, understanding our differences, and working together where we can find agreement. So unless there's another hand, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the meeting to a close, but I'm going to keep the meeting going for another 2 minutes in case somebody wants to talk across. But most importantly, I want you to save the comments, because people have been putting comments and links in the whole meeting. So I want you to do that. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody, and I'll give us 2 minutes before I close the meeting. So thank you all very much.
I would like also to invite people to put your contact info, your name and contact info into the chat so people can get back in touch with you if they were impressed by something that you had to say.
Should we also say a big thank you to John for always gathering these things together in expert and beautiful fashion. Thanks again.
All right. Next time I get to New York, you and Reverend Daughtry and I can get together for coffee. Maybe.
And Leslie too. Come on, let's have a little party.
Leslie can join us. All right. All right. Good night, everybody.